They called it the lawless frontier, a land where dusty winds carried whispers of broken dreams and hidden sins. On this harsh prairie, trouble didn't wait for dusk. It rode in broad daylight, armed with a trigger-happy hand and a heart hardened by survival. Yet none of that prepared anyone for the unspeakable events about to unfold at the sprawling Dunmore Ranch. For Elizabeth Dunmore, a spirited girl on the brink of womanhood, the enemy under her own roof would become deadlier than any gunslinger on the trail. Little did she know her salvation would rise from a Cheyenne warrior's courage and change both their destinies forever. Elizabeth Dunmore was born in 1868 on the wild plains of Wyoming Territory. Her earliest memories, steeped in the scent of sagebrush and the endless sky. She lived in a lonely cabin near the Laramie Mountains, built by her father, Angus Dunmore, a hardened man who distrusted the outside world and clung to old ways of hunting, planting, and bartering. After her mother died of fever, when Elizabeth was just 5, Angus grew colder. His rare moments of tenderness, usually sparked by Elizabeth's resemblance to her mother, vanished as quickly as they came, replaced by the distant stare that defined her childhood. Still, Elizabeth found moments of joy, especially in Jasmine, a stray mare she'd befriended. Riding across the plains gave her a glimpse of freedom beyond her father's bitterness. So when Angus announced a trip to Fort Laramie that spring, Elizabeth felt a thrill until she realized the journey held darker intentions than buying supplies. Elizabeth awoke before dawn, excitement stirring her restless dreams into anxious wakefulness. She braided her hair the way her mother used to, pinning it atop her head. She wore a simple calico dress that had once been Margaret's, with hems let out awkwardly. Angus glowered at her, as if she had no right to look so happy. They loaded the old buckboard wagon with bundles of furs, dried meats, and jars of preserves. Angus kept checking the sky, muttering about the weather. When the first hint of sunlight broke over the ridges, they set out, leaving behind their lonely cabin. The 2-day ride was slow, the roads rutted from spring rains. The silhouettes of bison and antelope dotted the prairies in the distance. Occasionally, Elizabeth spotted distant figures, perhaps ranchers or travelers. She waved, but Angus whipped the reins, ignoring her attempts at friendliness. On the second day, they came upon a shallow creek shimmering in the midday sun. Instead of resting, Angus pushed the horses to cross, ignoring their labored snorts. The water rose halfway up the wagon wheels, but Angus pressed on relentlessly. When they finally reached Fort Laramie, Elizabeth's eyes widened in awe. Timber barracks and blockhouses stood inside sturdy stone walls. Soldiers in dark blue uniforms patrolled with disciplined steps, rifles slung over their shoulders. Traders from the east had set up makeshift booths outside the fort, hawking everything from coffee beans to gingham dresses. Cheyenne and Lakota families also mingled around, some in peaceful trade, others watching warily. Angus handed the wagon reins to Elizabeth and instructed her in his gruff manner. "Stay put, or I'll tan your hide." Then he disappeared into the fort with his furs. Left alone, Elizabeth found herself fidgeting. Curiosity burned within her, beckoning her to explore. She was especially intrigued by a small group of Cheyenne men and women selling handmade jewelry and intricately beaded pouches. She'd heard stories of clashes between settlers and tribal communities, but her heart was open, intrigued by the artistry and the mystique of different cultures. She cast a fleeting glance at a particular man who seemed about her father's age, but carried himself with a dignified calm. His black hair was braided, and his eyes were discerning, as if quietly noting every detail of this bustling frontier post. Despite Angus's warning, Elizabeth felt drawn to walk over and at least look at the items for sale. So she set her shoulders, tethered the horses securely, and stepped away from the wagon to wander among the stalls. The Cheyenne man who had caught her eye was named Motse Iomai, meaning knife-bearer in English. He offered a friendly nod as she approached. She noticed a small display of handmade knives, their handles adorned with carefully carved bone and intricate beadwork. "Morning," Elizabeth said softly, hands clasped behind her. "Good morning," he replied in accented English. "You like these knives?" She swallowed, unsure what to say, because she had never seen such craftsmanship before. They're beautiful," she managed. He recognized the curiosity in her gaze. "Made by my brother. He's a skilled craftsman." Elizabeth nodded, entranced by the bright designs. Before she could comment further, Angus's voice lashed through the air. "Elizabeth, get away from there." He stomped toward them, eyes blazing. "What did I tell you? Don't mingle where you don't belong." Motse Iomai calmly stepped back, lowering his gaze to avoid intensifying the situation. Elizabeth felt her face flush hot with shame as Angus grabbed her arm roughly and jerked her away. The Cheyenne man didn't protest. He simply held Elizabeth's gaze for an instant, offering a silent empathy she did not fully understand. Angus marched her back to the wagon, cursing under his breath. Once out of earshot of the trading booths, his voice dropped to a menacing hiss. "Think you can just wander away, do you? You think the likes of them have anything to show you besides savage ways? Next time I catch you hobnobbing, I'll lock you in the wagon." Elizabeth's eyes welled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She resolved never to let her father see her cry. At the same time, she couldn't forget the stranger's face, the calm concern in his eyes. She didn't know it yet, but Motse Iomai's quiet stoicism would soon become the bedrock of her salvation. That night, father and daughter camped outside the fort. Angus had managed to sell his furs for a decent sum, though he scowled, claiming they'd been cheated. They ate a dinner of hardtack and jerky. Angus kept mostly silent, except to bitterly remark about increasing savage presence around the fort and how the army needs to clear them out. Elizabeth tried to ignore him and stared at the stars, yearning for the innocence of her childhood, for the maternal warmth she faintly remembered. Little did she know the sense of foreboding nipping at her heart was a warning of what fate would bring in the days ahead. The next morning, Angus insisted on an early departure, having finalized his provisions. Strange, Elizabeth thought, because they could have easily spent an extra day at the fort, enjoying relative safety and comfort. But Angus's jaw was set, and his eyes flickered with a brooding determination. As they traveled back across the plains, Angus's mood only darkened. His face, worn with lines of anger, was locked in a perpetual scowl. Elizabeth noticed he hadn't spent nearly as much of the earned money on supplies. In fact, the usual staples, flour, sugar, and coffee, were in suspiciously short supply. Instead, she spotted a small wooden crate in the wagon bed that Angus guarded jealously. That evening, they camped near a bend in the North Platte River. Elizabeth went to gather kindling, while Angus saw to the horses. Upon her return, she found him crouched by the wagon, prying open the wooden crate. Something metallic glinted inside. She recognized the shapes as rifles, brand new ones along with boxes of ammunition. Elizabeth froze in her tracks. Why had her father bought so many guns? Their homestead already had 2 rifles, more than enough to ward off predators. The chilling thought that her father might be planning violence prickled at her mind. Trying to calm herself, she approached arms full of twigs for their fire. Angus slammed the crate shut, locking eyes with her. For a moment, the only sound was the river's soft current and the lonely whistle of prairie wind. "Don't you got chores to do, girl?" he said, his voice low. "Fires don't build themselves." Elizabeth wanted to ask, "Why all these rifles?" But she held her tongue. Angus had never been gentle, but something in his demeanor now was especially menacing. Instead, she simply nodded, placed the twigs near the fire pit, and struck flint until flames leapt up. In the dancing light, Angus's face looked gaunt, as if he were consumed by an inner storm. Elizabeth thought of the Cheyenne man at the fort, how composed he seemed in contrast to her father's simmering rage. She wondered what life could be like if she were free to forge her own path. But for now, the winds carried only uncertainty, and her father's violent aura loomed like a dark thunderhead on the horizon. They rose at dawn to continue the journey. Elizabeth tried to quell her anxiety by focusing on chores, collecting water, sorting supplies, checking the harnesses. By midday, Angus guided the wagon onto a less traveled route, away from the main road that led back to their homestead. Worry gnawed at Elizabeth. "Pa," she ventured, "shouldn't we be heading west from the crossing?" He whipped the reins, spurring the horses. "You questioning me, girl?" She swallowed. "No, sir. I just noticed you keep your mouth shut." "I know what I'm doing." Elizabeth fell silent, her mind spinning. Where was he taking them? Hours passed. The sun beat down mercilessly. With each passing mile, Elizabeth grew more uneasy. Eventually, the wagon rumbled to a stop near a secluded canyon strewn with scrub bushes and jagged rocks. Angus climbed down and surveyed the area. Then she saw something that made her blood run cold. Nestled against the canyon wall were two men waiting with horses. One was short and stocky, wearing a battered bowler hat. The other was tall and lanky, his face nearly hidden by the brim of a dusty black hat. Elizabeth had never laid eyes on them before, but they clearly knew Angus. Angus walked over and murmured in low tones. She strained to hear, but the wind carried away the words. Nonetheless, she glimpsed one of the men, grin wickedly, slapping Angus on the back. Soon after, the men approached the wagon and eyed Elizabeth like a curiosity. "Look at that," the tall man drawled. "Angus's little girl's all grown." Elizabeth suppressed a shiver. Angus motioned for her to come forward. "We're staying here for the night, maybe longer. Get a fire going and see to the horses." Elizabeth complied, her heart pounding. The men walked back to a makeshift camp, rummaging through saddlebags. She heard them mention the guns and the deal, and something about easy money. She tried to piece it together. Were they planning an illegal arms trade, running rifles to outlaws or those who wanted to escalate the violence on the plains? As the sun set, the men huddled around the fire, passing a flask among them. Smoke curled into the twilight, swirling with the tension in the air. Angus's features flickered in the firelight, and Elizabeth saw raw greed etched into every line on his face. She busied herself unsaddling the horses, hoping no one would notice her trembling. Whatever was happening, it was bigger and more dangerous than anything she'd ever known. Finally, Angus ordered her to sleep by the wagon. "And don't go wandering off," he snapped. "I won't warn you again." Long after the men's raucous laughter died down, Elizabeth lay awake on a bedroll staring at the stars and listening to her father's loud snores. Her body felt stiff with dread, but her spirit was wrestling with the question, if an opportunity arose, should I run? Should I try to escape? Come morning, the men were already up sipping coffee from tin cups. Angus beckoned Elizabeth over and thrust a cup in her hand, not out of kindness, but as an afterthought. She took it wordlessly. The stocky man nodded at the crate of rifles. "You sure you want to part with these so cheap, Angus? That army supply wagon we heard about might pay more." "Don't matter," Angus replied. "I want these gone by the time I head home. You get me the money, or I'll find others who will." Elizabeth felt a wave of nausea. She was now certain her father was running guns, fueling the tensions that turned the frontier into a tinderbox of violence. If the army discovered this, Angus could face the gallows. And where would that leave her? Suddenly, hooves thundered in the distance. Everyone stiffened. A rider was approaching at full gallop. Was it lawmen bandits? Or worse? Within moments, the horse slid to a stop, its rider dust-covered and breathless. The newcomer spat grit from his mouth. "They're coming, Angus," he panted. "Saw 'em about 2 miles east. Soldiers from Fort Laramie. If they catch us, we're done for." The men sprang into action. The stocky one cursed and dashed to the crate. The tall man quickly saddled his horse. Angus spun to Elizabeth with feral intensity. "Get in the wagon, girl. We're moving out." But it was too late. On the ridge above, shapes appeared against the early morning sun. Men on horseback, uniformed, armed, and moving in a cloud of dust. The cavalry. Elizabeth's pulse hammered. She realized the soldiers might be more ally than enemy for her. If they caught Angus red-handed, maybe she could break free from his hold. Yet Angus was not about to surrender. He grabbed Elizabeth's arm in a vice-like grip and hustled her into the wagon seat. He seized the reins, snapping them violently. The horses lurched forward, nearly throwing Elizabeth onto the floorboards. Behind them, the outlaws cursed and scattered. Rifle shots echoed. Elizabeth clung to the seat as Angus drove the wagon like a madman into the canyon. Bullets whizzed past. She glimpsed one of the outlaws slump in his saddle and fall his horse bolting away. Ahead lay a narrow pass that cut through rocky cliffs. Angus whipped the horses mercilessly, the wagon wheels skidding over loose gravel. Elizabeth cried out as they careened around a bend, but Angus only set his jaw and urged more speed. Then disaster. A boulder jutted out, and the wagon's front wheel collided with a sickening crunch. The wheel splintered, catapulting Elizabeth from her seat. She flew through the air, landing hard on the rocky ground, pain jolting through her shoulder and side. Dazed, she looked up to see Angus jump off the stalled wagon, cursing violently. He grabbed one of the rifles from the crate, scanning the canyon walls for the cavalry. Then he glared at Elizabeth with a twisted fury, as though blaming her for the wheel's break. In that moment, Elizabeth felt something snap inside her. Fear turned into a primal dread. She struggled to stand, ignoring the burning ache in her side. Angus leveled the rifle at her. "You worthless whelp," he snarled. "If I'm going down, I ain't leaving no loose ends. You don't squeal to no one." Terror stabbed through Elizabeth like a blade. In her father's eyes, she saw a monstrous determination, as if he'd rather kill her than let her be taken by the soldiers. She backed away, trembling. "Pa, please. Don't." But Angus's finger curled around the trigger. Shots rang out, echoing through the canyon. But they didn't come from Angus. Before he could fire, a rifle blast sounded from the ridge above. Angus recoiled as a bullet knocked the weapon from his hands. Elizabeth heard hooves pounding behind her, and within seconds, a lone rider slid down the steep path, covering them both with a second rifle. Elizabeth's heart skipped when she recognized the rider, the Cheyenne man from Fort Laramie, Motse Eomae. He must have been following the cavalry or traveling parallel. Had he come to stop Angus from pulling the trigger? Angus roared in frustration and lunged for the fallen rifle. Motse Eomae fired again, sending a round into the dirt, just inches from Angus's hand. Angus froze, glaring at the Cheyenne with hate-filled eyes. Elizabeth stood there, trembling, blood pounding in her ears. She clutched her bruised shoulder, half in shock. The father she'd known, cruel, yes, but her father nonetheless had nearly killed her. The soldiers' bugle calls echoed in the canyon, indicating the cavalry was still on the move, closing in. Motse Iomai guided his horse closer, keeping his rifle trained on Angus. "Step away," he ordered. Angus spat in the dirt. "You savage dog! Who are you to interfere?" Motse Iomai's voice was calm, but unwavering. "Do not harm her." In the confusion, Elizabeth noticed Angus eyeing his side holster. He was about to try something desperate. Without thinking, she shouted, "Look out!" Angus drew a revolver. Before he could fire, Motse Iomai whipped his rifle butt across Angus's arm, sending the shot wide. The deafening blast reverberated off the canyon walls. Angus howled in pain, dropping the gun. He collapsed to the ground, cursing. In the distance, the cavalry's shouts grew louder. Soon enough, they'd be upon them. Motse Iomai leaped down from his horse and rushed toward Elizabeth. "Are you hurt?" he asked, concern filling his voice. She nodded, tears welling up. "My shoulder. I think I'm okay." But Angus lurched, furious, reaching for the rifle on the ground. "Don't you dare help her!" "She's mine." Motse Iomai planted a firm kick into Angus's midsection, knocking him flat. Gasping and sputtering, Angus glared at them with pure hatred. "Come," Motse Iomai said to Elizabeth, offering a steady hand. "We must go before the soldiers arrive." Elizabeth's confusion soared. "But aren't they the law?" "They could." Motse Iomai shook his head. "They will see me as an enemy, especially with these rifles lying around. They won't ask questions. They'll shoot first. We have to leave." She understood. The tension between tribes and the army was at a boiling point. A Cheyenne man found near a crate of illegal rifles might be charged with treason or shot on sight. Elizabeth cast one last horrified glance at Angus, who lay in the dust clutching his side. Then she allowed Motse Iomai to help her onto his horse. Together they galloped away from the echoing gunfire and her father's savage threats, heading deeper into the labyrinth of rocky canyons. They rode for nearly an hour. The swirling dust and the pounding of the horse's hooves melded with Elizabeth's throbbing pain. Only sheer adrenaline kept her upright. Finally, Motse Iomai steered the horse into a narrow defile hidden from prying eyes and brought them to a halt. Elizabeth slid down, wincing. Her ankle twinged when she put weight on it. Kneeling, Motse Iomai gently checked her injuries. "You'll have bruises, maybe some strain, but I think it's not broken." She let out a shaky breath, tears threatening to spill. Thank you," she stammered. "You saved my life." He nodded, offering a water pouch. She drank greedily, relief flooding through her. The memory of Angus' rifle leveled at her still seared her thoughts. Elizabeth looked around the hidden canyon. "What do we do now? Won't the cavalry come after us?" Motse Iomai shrugged. "They'll be busy chasing your father's men, but we can't stay here long." She suddenly realized she had no home to return to. No illusions about her father's fatherhood remained. Her mind whirled with the ramifications. "Where are you from?" she asked, trying to piece together a plan. Motse Iomai's eyes flickered with reflection. "My people camped near the Powder River until last winter. Many of us scattered. I was at Fort Laramie to speak with the army about peace, but they only want what they want." Elizabeth didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. The wind rustled through the canyon, carrying the faint odor of sage and dust. "I can guide you somewhere safe," he said gently. "Perhaps a nearby settlement. But your father might be there if he escapes. Or you can stay with my people for a time if you choose. But it's dangerous for us too." She thought of all the rumors she'd heard from homesteaders about tribal camps, the danger, the savage stereotypes. But her own father had been the true threat. This man, a supposed savage, had risked his life to save her. She took a moment to gather her courage. "I'll go with you," she whispered. He nodded. "Then we ride north away from the soldiers. Rest for a moment, and we continue." As the sun climbed higher, Elizabeth lay back against a smooth rock, letting the tension of the morning fade. Yet the illusions of her old life shattered around her. She wasn't the same frontier girl who left home just a few days ago. She had nearly died at her father's hands, and a Cheyenne man she barely knew had rescued her at great risk. Perhaps the lines between good and bad, civilized and savage, were not as clear as her father had insisted. By late afternoon, they had put several miles between themselves and the chaos of the canyon. Motse'eomae led them through winding arroyos and over ridges that overlooked vast golden prairies. At times, Elizabeth glimpsed small herds of buffalo, a reminder of the old ways that still thrived beyond the reach of the railroad tracks. At dusk, they found a sheltered hollow with a trickle of fresh water and enough brush for a small, discreet fire. Elizabeth was exhausted and sore, but managed to gather sticks while Motse'eomae tended to his horse. They spoke little, each consumed by the day's events. When the fire crackled to life, they sat opposite each other. Elizabeth gingerly rotated her shoulder, wincing. Motse'eomae rummaged in a pouch and pulled out herbs. "Hold still," he said, mixing them with a bit of water in a small tin cup. He smeared the herbal paste on a scrap of cloth and pressed it to her bruised skin. The sensation was cooling a balm that seemed to draw out the pain. "These help reduce swelling," he explained. Elizabeth breathed deeply, nodding her thanks. She marveled at his gentleness, so at odds with her father's cruelty. Her gaze drifted up to the star-filled sky. "I don't understand how he could turn on me like that," she said, her voice trembling. Motse'eomae listened quietly. After a moment, he spoke softly. "Fear and greed can twist a man's heart. I have seen it before." She swallowed hard, remembering the hatred in Angus's eyes. "What if he comes after me?" she whispered, a cold dread tightening her chest. Motse'eomae's expression darkened. "He may. Or the army may capture him for his crimes. Either way, we will try to stay safe. For now, rest." She nodded, tears glimmering but not falling. The emotional weight of the day pressed heavily on her soul. She was alone in the world, except for this stranger who had shown her more compassion than her own kin. They ate a sparse meal of dried bison meat, Motse'eomae, carried followed by sips of water. Then the two of them bedded down by the low flames, lulled by the soothing hum of nocturnal crickets. Over the next week, they ventured ever northward, passing through hidden valleys and rolling grasslands. Motse'eomae taught Elizabeth basic survival skills, from finding edible plants to spotting vantage points that would reveal approaching riders. She learned how to camouflage a campsite and how to guide a horse using subtle cues rather than harsh jerks on the reins. During moments of quiet rest, Elizabeth found herself confiding bits of her life. She spoke of her mother's kind spirit, how she died too soon, and how her father's heart seemed to die along with her. She described the lonely homestead, her daily chores, her longing for something bigger and kinder. Motse Aomae listened with the same calm attention. He told her of the time before the conflicts escalated, when tribes traveled freely with the bison herds. He described how the Cheyenne winter camps once dotted the banks of the Powder River, how the children played while the elders told stories around fires. But the intrusion of settlers and the army's broken treaties had pushed them to the brink. Despite the hardships, Elizabeth sensed that Motse Aomae carried hope within him, a belief that peace and respect could exist if people were willing to see past fear. She found that spark comforting a beacon in her uncertain future. One cloudy afternoon, they crested a ridge and glimpsed a small Cheyenne encampment in the valley below, just a few teepees near a bend in a shallow river, smoke wafting from central fires. Elizabeth's heart thudded. She felt both apprehension and relief at the prospect of human contact. Motse Aomae led the horse down a winding path toward the tents. When they arrived, children peeked out curiously. A couple of elders emerged from a large teepee, their expressions wary. Elizabeth felt awkward and out of place, a white girl among Cheyenne families. But Motse Aomae dismounted, raised his hands in greeting, and spoke softly in his native tongue. Gradually the tension eased. Women stepped forward, some offering cautious smiles. One woman approached Elizabeth and touched her arm gently, indicating a place to sit near a cooking fire. Over the next hour, Motse Aomae explained Elizabeth's situation, though she couldn't understand the Cheyenne words. She only caught her own name occasionally. She perceived compassion in their eyes, as though they recognized she was alone and wounded both in body and spirit. They made space for her, near a low fire, serving her a mild stew of roots and wild onions. Elizabeth felt tears sting at the corners of her eyes as she tasted the warmth of the food, the warmth of their hospitality. A sense of belonging kindled inside her for the first time in years. Though Elizabeth assumed she'd only stay a few days, the encampment became her shelter for weeks. The small group of Cheyenne were part of a larger band, scattered across the plains, avoiding army patrols and living in relative secrecy. They welcomed Elizabeth with cautious acceptance once they saw she posed no threat. She learned more of their language, especially words for everyday tasks. Under Motse Aomae's guidance, she helped gather edible roots and herbs, fetch water, and tend the fires. In turn, the Cheyenne women showed her how to tan hides and make simple beaded bracelets. The daily labor, though tiring, felt meaningful, and each day her bruises and emotional wounds started to heal. In the evenings, she'd sit with Motse Aomae and a few elders around the communal fire. They told stories of their ancestors, spiritual tales of how the world began, of heroic deeds and tragic betrayals. Elizabeth marveled at the richness of Cheyenne culture, something her father had once dismissed as savage superstition. But here it felt vibrant and full of wisdom. One night, after a meal of roasted deer, an elder named Red Pipe turned to Elizabeth and asked in halting English, Your father, come back for you." Elizabeth's heart clenched. She shrugged. "I don't know. He tried to kill me. Maybe the army took him, or maybe he's roaming free, wanting revenge." The elder nodded grimly. "Evil sits in some hearts." Motse Aomae caught Elizabeth's eye. She saw a solemn promise in his gaze that he would protect her if Angus ever returned. That unspoken vow became a source of comfort to her, a reason to breathe easier under the vast starry sky. Days turned into weeks. Spring flowers began to poke through the grasses. Elizabeth found herself smiling more, sharing chores with Cheyenne girls her age, listening to the gentle laughter that wove through camp. Yet a sense of foreboding always hovered. She felt it in the hush that fell whenever a distant rider was spotted, or when an army patrol's dust cloud appeared on the horizon. In the quiet mornings, she sometimes helped Motse Eoma care for his horses. He was gentle with animals, never raising his voice or using force beyond what was necessary. One morning, as she brushed one of the mares, she asked him a question that had been weighing on her heart. "If my father does come for me, should I face him, or should I run?" Motse Eoma paused, resting a hand on the horse's flank. "You must decide what you truly want, but you are not alone now. If he comes, we will stand with you." Tears threatened to spill. She was grateful beyond words, but still haunted by the memory of Angus raising that rifle. "Why," she whispered, "why do you help me, Motse Eoma e?" Exhaled slowly. "I have seen too much hate. When I saw you at the fort, your eyes were kind. My spirit told me you were not like those who only want to hurt us." He hesitated, then added, "Years ago, a white doctor saved my daughter's life. He did not have to, but he did. We repay kindness when we can." A wave of emotion washed over Elizabeth. She reached out and squeezed his hand in gratitude. In that moment, she felt a bond that transcended blood, a bond of shared humanity. One late afternoon, while most of the men were out hunting, a boy ran into camp breathless. He spoke rapidly in Cheyenne, and Elizabeth's comprehension had grown enough to catch crucial words. "Soldiers, patrol, heading this way." A hush fell over the camp. Women hurried to gather necessities, ready to break down tipis if they had to flee. The boy explained that the patrol was fairly large, and no one could be certain if they were searching for something or merely passing by. Motse Eoma emerged from a tipi and met Elizabeth's eyes. Without words, she knew he wanted her to hide. He guided her toward a rocky outcrop near the edge of camp, a natural vantage point behind tall boulders. "Stay low," he cautioned. "If they come, do not let them see you." Elizabeth swallowed hard. Fear lanced through her. Part of her wanted to run. Part of her wanted to stay. She watched the camp swirl with activity as teepees were quietly taken down. Children shushed. She clung to the hope that the patrol might ride past without incident. Sunset approached, and the wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant rain. From her hiding place, Elizabeth saw dust on the horizon. Silhouettes of horses and men. The cavalry. Her mind darted to the memory of Angus's battered face of him lying in the canyon after their confrontation. A dreaded thought emerged. Could Angus be with them, leading them here? The patrol grew nearer. She counted at least 15 soldiers led by an officer with stiff posture. To her relief, she didn't see her father among them. But that relief was short-lived. The soldiers spotted the figures in the valley. They angled their horses toward the camp. The Cheyenne men returning from the hunt quickly assessed the threat. Both sides looked tense hands near their weapons. Elizabeth felt a jolt of panic. She had heard too many stories of misunderstandings leading to bloodshed. Motse Eoma stepped forward to meet the patrol. The officer halted, raising a hand. She couldn't hear the words, but she recognized the tension in the air. An older Cheyenne man offered a gesture of peace, but the officer barked an order. A soldier dismounted, rifle in hand. The Cheyenne men bristled. Women in the camp clutched their children, uncertain whether to flee or wait. From her vantage point, Elizabeth whispered a silent prayer. She willed the soldier not to escalate. Just then the soldier rummaged in his saddlebag and pulled out something. Through the glare of the setting sun, Elizabeth could barely make it out, but it looked like a wanted poster. He showed it to Motse Aomae, pointing emphatically. Elizabeth's heart thumped. Was the poster for her father, for Motse Aomae, or for her? She inched closer, trying to see. Her foot slipped on loose gravel, dislodging a small rock that rolled down the slope. Instantly, the soldier whipped around, rifle raised, scanning the ridge. Elizabeth ducked behind the boulder, heart hammering. Then she heard the officer shout, "Search the area." Motse Aomae quickly realized the situation was dire. Soldiers fanned out. The Cheyenne hunters, outnumbered and outgunned, had little choice but to back away. Women and children began fleeing into the bushes and ravines. Elizabeth trembled in her hiding spot, pressing her back to the boulder. The voices of soldiers grew closer. She bit her lip to keep from crying out in terror. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her arm. She nearly screamed before recognizing Motse Aomae's face, streaked with urgency. "We must go," he whispered. "Now." She nodded, adrenaline surging. They crept along the ridge, keeping low, moving away from the searching soldiers. But luck wasn't on their side. A trooper spotted them and yelled, "Halt!" They broke into a desperate run, descending the far side of the ridge. Gunshots cracked and bullets hissed by. Elizabeth forced her legs to move, pain stabbing her still-healing ankle. Motse Aomae led her to where his horse was tethered near a scrubby tree. He vaulted onto the horse and hauled Elizabeth up behind him. Gunfire erupted anew, ricocheting off rocks. The horse reared, nearly throwing them, but Motse Aomae steadied it. They galloped away, dust swirling, hearts pounding in unison. Riding at breakneck speed, they put distance between themselves and the chaos. Elizabeth clung to Motse Aomae, tears streaming from her eyes, not just from fear, but from sorrow for the innocent families forced to scatter. They didn't stop until the sun dipped below the horizon. By then, they had reached a copse of cottonwoods near a winding creek. Only then did they dare dismount. Elizabeth's lungs burned, her body shaking. Motse Aomae offered a canteen, his expression grim. "I'm sorry you had to see this. They are searching for us. Maybe for you, maybe for me. This land is no longer safe." Elizabeth wanted to crumble into sobs, but she held herself together. She took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of desperation. "What do we do?" He pursed his lips. "We keep moving, find a safe route. Maybe further north to the Black Hills or across the mountains." She felt a pang. She didn't want to live the rest of her life running, but she had no home, no family to turn to. Exhausted, she sank to the ground beside a large tree, tears finally spilling over. Motse Aomae crouched beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You are strong, Elizabeth," he said softly. "I have seen it. We will survive this." She nodded through her tears, grateful for his presence. In the hush of nightfall, the gentle trickle of the creek was their only solace. They pressed on for several days, avoiding known trails and forging a path through difficult terrain. A sense of constant alertness permeated every decision. They slept in short shifts, always prepared to flee. One moonlit evening, as they set up a small camp in a shallow ravine, a figure stepped out from behind a boulder, pistol drawn. Elizabeth gasped. It was Angus. Her father stood there, battered and haggard, hatred burning in his bloodshot eyes. "You think you can run from me, girl?" His voice cracked with rage. "I tracked you across hell." Elizabeth froze, heart in her throat. Motse Aomae instinctively reached for his knife, but Angus cocked the pistol. "One move, and I shoot you both." Elizabeth could barely believe he'd found them. But Angus had always been tenacious and cunning, especially when fueled by anger. Angus advanced the pistol aimed at Motse Eomae's chest. "You filthy savage! You took what's mine." Elizabeth trembled. "I'm not yours. You tried to kill me," Angus sneered. "Because you're too stupid to obey. Now you gone and run off with him. Think you can live among those devils?" Motse Eomae spoke quietly, hands raised. "Angus done more. She is your daughter, but you do not own her like property. Leave her be." Angus threw back his head and let out a bitter laugh. Fine words from a heathen. "It's over. I'll handle you first, then drag her back." He leveled the gun at Motse Eomae's face. Elizabeth's world slowed. Instinct took over. She lunged, grabbing Angus's arm. The pistol fired the shot going wide. Angus snarled, smashing the butt of the gun into Elizabeth's temple. She reeled, blood trickling down her face. Dazed, she dropped to her knees, vision swimming. Angus pivoted to aim at Motse Eomae again, but this time the Cheyenne man was ready. With one swift motion, he hurled his knife, lodging it into Angus's forearm. Angus howled, the pistol clattering to the ground as he clutched his wounded arm. Before Angus could recover, Motse Eomae lunged forward, knocking him to the ground. They grappled, dust billowing. Elizabeth fought through the dizziness, crawling toward the fallen pistol. She grabbed it, heart pounding. Angus shoved Motse Eomae off with surprising strength. He reached for the knife embedded in his arm, a crazed glint in his eyes. "You'll pay for that." Elizabeth stood, pistol shaking in her hand. "Stop!" She screamed, her voice echoing through the ravine. Angus froze, glaring at the gun in her trembling grip. Blood streamed down his arm, dripping onto the rocky ground. Elizabeth's vision swam, but her stance was firm. She had never aimed a gun at anyone, much less her own father. "I won't let you hurt anyone again," she whispered, tears mixing with her blood. Angus spat his voice ragged. "You haven't got the guts, girl." She swallowed, finger hovering on the trigger. "I don't want to shoot you, but I will." Motse Eomae got to his feet, positioning himself between Angus and any chance of escape. "Enough," he commanded. Angus slumped to his knees, rage contorting his face. "You're all I got left, Elizabeth. You shoot me, you got nothing. No future, no name." Elizabeth steadied her aim. "I'd rather have nothing than live in fear of you." For a tense moment, the world seemed poised on a razor's edge. Then Angus let out a choked sob, the adrenaline draining from him. He crumpled, clinging to his wounded arm. Blood seeped through his fingers, and he muttered curses under his breath. Motse Eomae stepped forward, retrieved his knife, and held Angus at bay. Elizabeth slowly lowered the pistol, releasing a shaky breath. In the faint moonlight, the father who had haunted her nightmares knelt before her, injured and defeated. With Angus disarmed, Motse Eomae bound his hands. Elizabeth felt numb, her mind reeling. She stared at the man who had once carried her on his shoulders, taught her how to ride a horse, instilled in her both fear and longing for approval. Now he lay whimpering in the dust, cursing under his breath about betrayal. Motse Eomae turned to Elizabeth gently. "Your temple is bleeding," he said, concern evident. She pressed a shaky hand to the wound. "I'm okay," she managed. "But what do we do with him?" Motse-Omae looked at Angus with evident disgust. If we leave him, he may come after us again, or die in the wilderness. If we take him to the soldiers, maybe they will hang him. Is that what you want? Elizabeth's stomach churned. Despite everything, the idea of sentencing her father to the gallows made her sick, but she couldn't let him roam free. After a moment, she said, "We should turn him in. He committed crimes. He was smuggling guns and he tried to kill me. He has to face justice." Motse-Omae nodded. "Then we must find a way to deliver him safely. But be wary. The soldiers may not treat me kindly." Elizabeth hesitated. Indeed, any contact with the army could be dangerous, but maybe if she was the one turning Angus in, they'd accept Motse-Omae's presence. It was a slim hope, yet it seemed the only path. Dawn was a few hours away. Elizabeth and Motse-Omae forced Angus to his feet. He snarled, but had little fight left, especially with his arm bleeding. They made a crude sling to keep pressure on the wound, ensuring Angus wouldn't bleed out before facing trial. They marched through the night, Angus stumbling and cursing. By first light, they reached a main trail near a small settlement. Elizabeth recognized the faint outline of a watchtower, a remote army outpost a few miles away from Fort Laramie. Soldiers would be there patrolling. Fatigue weighed on her like a lead blanket, but she pressed on pistol in hand, making sure Angus didn't slip away. Motse-Omae scanned the horizon warily for cavalry patrols. Eventually, they spotted a trio of soldiers riding ahead on a dusty road, likely on routine patrol. Elizabeth steeled herself, stepping forward. "Over here," she called, heart pounding. The soldiers reined their horses, eyes widening at the sight. A bruised girl with a pistol, a Cheyenne man, and a bound, bleeding Angus. Immediately, rifles were unholstered. "Stand down," Elizabeth shouted, voice quivering. "This man, my father. He's a gun runner, wanted for crimes. He tried to kill me. I'm turning him in. Please don't shoot." The lead soldier, a gruff sergeant, eyed her suspiciously. His gaze flicked to Motse-Omae. "What about him?" "He saved me," Elizabeth said firmly. "He means you no harm." Angus let out a derisive laugh, wincing in pain. "Don't believe her. She's run off with that savage. He's no better than the rest." The soldier glared down at Angus. "Shut it." He looked at Elizabeth, then nodded to a comrade. "Disarm them and bring 'em in. We'll sort this out." Elizabeth's heart raced, but she gently placed the pistol on the ground. Motse-Omae surrendered his knife. The soldiers cuffed Angus more securely, ignoring his protests. Then they turned to Motse-Omae. One soldier drew rope, intending to tie him up. Elizabeth intervened. "He's not a criminal. He protected me from my father. Please." The sergeant hesitated, scanning Motse-Omae's stoic face. "Fine," he said, after a tense moment. "But keep your hands where we can see 'em. Any trouble, and you're done." Motse-Omae nodded. Thus, under the watchful rifles of the patrol, they proceeded to the army outpost. At the outpost, Angus was handed over to an officer. Elizabeth recounted the story, how Angus smuggled rifles, tried to kill her, and threatened Motse-Omae. Several of the soldiers recognized Angus's face from recent wanted bulletins. The officer's eyes hardened as he listened. They placed Angus in a cramped holding cell. A medic bandaged his arm, but made no promises of comfort beyond that. Meanwhile, the officer questioned Elizabeth for hours, verifying details of the gun smuggling. They cross-checked everything with old reports. When asked about Motse-Omae's involvement, Elizabeth insisted he was her rescuer, testifying that he had no part in the illicit gun trade. The officer eyed him skeptically, but no direct evidence pointed to wrongdoing on his part. Still, the tension in the outpost was palpable. Soldiers eyed Motse Eomae with suspicion. Finally, the officer conferred with his superiors and declared Angus would be transferred to Fort Laramie to stand trial. The stolen rifles, or what remained of them, were presumably lost or confiscated in the canyon. Angus would face multiple charges, possibly including attempted murder of his daughter. A gallows sentence seemed likely, unless there was a legal technicality or a bribe to be paid. Elizabeth watched through barred windows as her father was hauled out to a wagon. He shouted curses at her, calling her a traitor. She closed her eyes, tears slipping free. She had no illusions left about paternal love. A soldier turned to Elizabeth. "We'll need you in Fort Laramie to testify. You have somewhere safe to stay until then." She exchanged a glance with Motse Eomae. They'd never been more than traveling companions in dire circumstances. But now, what next? Motse Eomae took a slow breath. "We can find lodging in town for a short time until her testimony is complete." Elizabeth nodded gratefully. The officer frowned. A Cheyenne man might not be well received in town, especially with the tension these days. Elizabeth set her jaw. "He stays with me. He's done more for me than anyone else. I'll pay for lodging if needed." The soldier shrugged. "Suit yourself, but be cautious. Folks around here might not take kindly to—" He let the words hang. Elizabeth felt a spark of defiance. "We'll manage." They left the outpost riding a pair of horses provided by the army. Despite the mistrust, the officer agreed to let them travel together with minimal harassment, so long as Elizabeth showed up to testify in a week's time. Angus, shackled and seething, would travel in a prison wagon. Elizabeth and Motse Eomae rode in silence, the weight of finality settling in. The question of what came after Angus's trial loomed large. As they approached a cluster of buildings that formed a modest frontier town, Elizabeth felt tension creep into her shoulders. They found a small boarding house run by a middle-aged widow named Mrs. Barrow. She offered them a meager room after Elizabeth explained she was to testify at Fort Laramie. She eyed Motse Eomae with apprehension, but Elizabeth's polite insistence and upfront payment eased the landlady's reluctance. That evening, they shared a simple meal of stew in the room. Outside the window, the town's main street was quiet, except for the occasional drunk stumbling out of the saloon. Elizabeth stared at the tin bowl in her hands. "After the trial, I don't know where to go," she admitted. "If I stay here, I'll be seen as that girl whose father was hanged. If I go east, I have no relatives, no money." She looked up at Motse Eomae. "I don't want you to get in trouble for staying near settlers either. You've already risked enough for me." He contemplated her words. "My people are scattered, but some remain near the Tongue River. I may join them if the army will allow it. But your path is your own." Her eyes glistened. She remembered the acceptance she'd found among the Cheyenne camp, the feeling of belonging she'd never had at the homestead. She also considered the realities of living as a white woman with a Cheyenne tribe at a time of rampant prejudice. Despite the uncertain future, one thing felt clear. She did not want to part ways with the one person who had shown her unwavering compassion. "If your people can accept me, I would like to go with you," she said softly, tears brimming. "I can learn your ways. I don't belong in the world my father came from." Motse Eomae's eyes shone with understanding. "You would be welcome, though it may be hard. The times are dangerous for all of us." Elizabeth smiled through her tears. "So be it. Danger is everywhere. But if it means living free from hate, I'll endure." They clasped hands across the table, forging a mutual resolve to stand by each other through whatever came next. A week later, Elizabeth and Motse-Eomae arrived at Fort Laramie. The trial was a modest affair, held in a makeshift courtroom near the fort's headquarters. A few curious onlookers milled about, ranchers, traders, off-duty soldiers. Angus Dunmore stood shackled, his arm still bandaged, face sallow with fury. Elizabeth took the stand, her voice trembling, but resolute. She recounted how Angus had become involved in smuggling rifles, how he'd threatened her life the chase through the canyon, and how Motse-Eomae intervened to save her. Soldiers from the outpost corroborated her story, noting Angus's wanted status for illegal arms dealing. Angus tried to rail against the accusations, calling Elizabeth a liar, and Motse-Eomae a savage conspirator, but his outburst fell flat without evidence. The presiding officer handed down a guilty verdict for gun smuggling and attempted murder. Sentencing was scheduled for the following day. The gallows waited for men like Angus Dunmore. Afterward, Elizabeth stood outside the makeshift courtroom, gazing at the fort's walls. Relief washed over her. The father she'd once feared had no power over her anymore. She would never again cower under his shadow. Motse-Eomae joined her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It is done," he said softly. She nodded, tears of emotional release forming. "Yes, it is." They walked together past the fort's gate. The midday sun glowed against the open plains beyond. The railroad lines glistened in the distance, a symbol of a changing world that had little patience for nuance or tradition. But Elizabeth felt a weight lift, replaced by determination. She had no illusions about an easy life ahead, but at least it would be her life shaped by her choices, not her father's tyranny. Hand in hand, they mounted their horses. Elizabeth turned for a final glance at Fort Laramie, remembering how she once arrived here under her father's rule. Now she left, as a free woman. She looked at Motse-Eomae, who offered a quiet smile. Together they rode northward toward the rolling plains and the uncertain promise of a new beginning. In the distance, the wide sky beckoned with possibilities, and Elizabeth felt her heart soar. She was no longer the girl who nearly died at her father's hands. She was the woman who chose life, love, and the courage to walk an untamed path, guided by the unwavering kindness of a Cheyenne man who risked everything to save her. Thank you for joining us on Elizabeth's powerful journey from hardship to hope and from fear to love. Her story reminds us that even in the toughest times, compassion and second chances can build unexpected bonds. Which part of her journey moved you most? Share your thoughts in the comments. If her courage inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable frontier tales. See you in the next adventure.